Hello everyone, Prosperity here. The Legion expansion is almost upon us, and a lot of changes to the classes and specializations have been made to the game. This guide series is meant to break down these changes to help you better understand what's going on. Welcome to the intermediate guide to the Restoration Druid in Legion. Before we get started with this guide, please take a moment to pause this video and watch the beginner guide if you haven't already. That video covers the core combat abilities and will be very useful to you as we work through everything in this guide. I'll link it on screen and in the description below for you. Now that we're all on the same page, let's get started. This second part to the Restoration series will be focusing on your core passives and cooldowns. Your passives are Living Seed, your Mastery, Harmony, Omen of Clarity, and Ysera's Gift. Your core cooldowns are Barkskin, Dash, Innervate, Ironbark, Tranquility, and Ursol's Vortex. Let's get into it with the core passives shown on screen now. These don't have a massive impact on your gameplay altogether, but offer some interesting interactions between some of your abilities that you'll need to know in order to make the most out of them. Living Seed causes an extra buff to be placed on a target for 15 seconds when you critically strike with your Swift Mend, Regrowth, or Healing Touch. This buff stores 50% of the direct heal, and when a target with Living Seed on them is attacked next, it blooms, healing the target for the amount stored. You will get most of your procs for this from Regrowth, as it has a higher critical strike chance than the other two, but you should pay attention to which targets are affected by it to plan your next healing casts accordingly. Unless the target of this is taking lots of damage within the next few seconds of gaining the effect, your heal over time effects should suffice to keep them alive until the spell blooms. Your Mastery, Harmony, increases all healing you deal to a target by 5% for each heal over time effect on them. That is of course baseline, and the percentage increases with the Mastery stat on your gear. With your core toolkit you have 4 heal over time effects, meaning that you have the potential for 20% increased healing baseline. It's a good practice to at least have rejuvenation on the target before hardcasting your Regrowth or Healing Touch spells on them as a general rule. Omen of Clarity gives an effect to your Life Bloom spell that makes it have a 4% chance to cause your next regrowth to cost no mana. For this reason alone, you should have a Life Bloom rolling on a target at all times, regardless of if it's actually healing or not. Refreshing your Life Bloom right before it expires is the best practice to get the most out of the mana efficiency this passive provides. Ysera's Gift is a passive heal effect that heals you for 3% of your maximum health every 5 seconds. If this heal would not increase your health total, it will instead heal the nearest random injured ally instead. You have absolutely no control over this, but it's nice to know it exists. Now that we've covered all the passives, let's take a look at the core cooldowns for Resto. Every class has their own set of cooldowns, and learning how and when to use them is an integral part to playing your class well. Barkskin is the first of your cooldowns. It has a 1-minute cooldown and can only be cast on yourself. When activated, it reduces all incoming damage to you by 20% and prevents your spellcast from being delayed from taking damage for 12 seconds. This cannot be used if you are incapacitated in any way, have lost control of your character, or are shapeshifted. The reset time for this spell is relatively short, so you should feel free to use it on fights as much as possible, especially on fights with consistent raid-wide damage. Dash is your mobility cooldown. This is not your main source of mobility. You'll get that from moving in and out of cat form itself. This is reserved for moments when the 15% increase from cat form will not be enough to get you out of a bad effect. Dash is on a 3-minute cooldown, and when activated will put you into cat form and will increase your movement speed by 70% for 15 seconds, or until you get out of cat form. Innervate is on a 3-minute cooldown and can be cast on either yourself or a friendly healer. Casting this ability will cause the target to be able to cast all spells without spending mana for 10 seconds. If you're having trouble conserving your mana, you should cast this on yourself as much as possible, but if you aren't, you can feel free to cast this on another healer that is. In a raid setting, this spell is only castable on players that are currently in healing specializations. Ironbark is another defensive spell on a 1.5-minute cooldown, but it can be cast on any party or raid member. Casting this reduces all damage taken by the target by 20% for 12 seconds, which is really useful for helping keep a tank that has run out of personal mitigation alive. There should be very little need to cast this on yourself, as you have the same ability for yourself with Barkskin on a shorter cooldown. Tranquility is your main raid healing cooldown. It's on a 3-minute cooldown and costs a little less mana than your Efflorescence. Activating this spell heals all allies for a truckload of health over 8 seconds while channeling, which means that any actions taken for the duration will cancel the channel. Note that if you aren't in a raid setting, the healing of the spell is doubled. Please note also that this spell is easily wasted if other healers in your group also use their major cooldowns at the same time, so you should coordinate with them to make sure that cooldowns don't overlap too much. Ursol's Vortex is a crowd control cooldown that is very useful for kiting or just keeping mobs in place for a short period. It's on a 1-minute cooldown with a 30-yard range, giving you an 8-yard radius ground target. Once you cast it, all enemies in the area will be slowed by 50% and each affected enemy will be pulled back to the center of the vortex the first time they break free from the effect. This is primarily used for kiting because you can cast it while in any form, making it that much easier to move away from the affected enemies. Let's recap. Keep an eye on your living seed procs. Make use of your mastery by rolling hots on a target before you hard cast on them, and make good use of your free regrowths with Omen of Clarity procs. Use your Bark Skin and Iron Bark to mitigate damage to your raid team when necessary. Keep yourself mana efficient with smart uses of Innervate, and make sure you coordinate your Tranquility use with other healers on your team to minimize overlap. These are great rules to follow that should help you to get an even better grasp on the Resto Druid. That's all I have for the intermediate guide to the Restoration Druid in Legion. Hopefully with this breakdown you've gotten a better sense of your toolkit and can start to work on perfecting your cooldown usage. Subscribe to keep an eye out for the third part to the Resto series and for more Legion class guides. Of course, I will be more than happy to answer any questions you have in the comments below or on Twitter at the Luranzas. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, have fun.